Hey everyone, it's Erin from the Impatient Gardener, and I'm coming to you again from my kitchen table. Winter is a pain in the butt to try to get outside to make videos, but hopefully we'll get out there soon to do a few. But today I'm doing a video that actually a lot of you asked for, which is about how I design a garden. So since I am currently in the middle of designing a new area of the garden, I thought it was a good time to sort of address this. The first thing you should know is that I am not a garden designer. I am a gardener who likes to design my own gardens, but I have no formal training. I have done a lot of research, read a lot of books because it is a topic that interests me quite a bit, but I'm not a professional and I don't play one on YouTube. So what I'm going to describe here is really the way I design a garden, and hopefully some of this will resonate with you and help you maybe come up with a plan to design some areas in your own garden. But I think everyone's process is going to be kind of their own and individual because we all think in different ways. So what I'm describing is just sort of how I do it, but doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way or certainly not the only way. So the way that a garden design starts for me is with a little niggle in my head. Something strikes me in my yard or my garden that I either don't like or I think could be improved upon, and I can't ever really pinpoint when that moment is, but it gets in there and then it rattles around in my brain for about the next, well, sometimes few years. But sometimes when that niggle gets in my head with a little bit of a what if it looked like this instead of that, that's when it starts developing into something bigger. And once I can't get that niggle out of my head anymore and I get to the point where I feel like I need to do something, that's when something sort of officially becomes a project to me. So the first step is sort of define the space. And I mean literally define how big that space is. For me, that can be, it's from this tree to this spot in the yard, and I've got a very physical representation of what that space is going to be. But if you're moving into a new house with an empty yard, that can be really overwhelming, and I would highly suggest if you're taking on a really big project like that, that you get someone to help you at least define the concept a little bit. So sometimes independent garden centers offer design services where they'll help you with a design if you buy the plants there, or sometimes you can pay a couple $100 to them to get a general design concept going on, or you could hire a garden designer and see if a garden designer would be willing to even just do a consultation with you. Sometimes just coming to your house and talking through things can help you get firm up what you want and what is possible in an area. I think it's important to get a rough idea of where you're headed in a big project before you start any little components of it, because a lot of times if you change midstream, now you have to go back and redo the components that you've already done, and you've already invested time and money into those. So it's best to get a concept going at the very least before you tackle a specific project. Now for me, the project that I'm working on this spring is on the north side of our driveway, which has changed a lot over the years. When we bought this house, there were enormous spruce trees on either side of the driveway. It was actually like a North Woods look. And those spruce trees got big, and the power company said they can't be there anymore because they were running into the power lines, and all the spruce trees came out. Then last year or the year before, a very large ash tree in that part of the yard had to come out because, like every other ash tree here, it's succumbed to emerald ash spore. And it was an enormous tree, and when that tree came out, it really changed the whole feel of the space. And so what had felt like kind of a natural semi-wild area suddenly looked unkempt and weedy to me. And also what factored into this was that a couple of years ago when we took those spruces out, we did a small garden at the end of the driveway, which we attempted to create a privacy screen, and it's worked out really well, and I'll link to a blog post on that. But what was interesting about that was that despite having all these beautiful gardens around my house, I've never had so many comments from neighbors about how nice it looked down there. And of course, it occurred to me that if you've got beautiful gardens around your house, but the entry to your home looks terrible, well, that's not a very good first impression. And the other thing I found with that was that I enjoyed driving into my own driveway more. It was nice to come to a place that looked good from the get-go. So that really was starting a spark in me even before that ash tree came down. So once you've got that area defined, the next thing you need to do is take a really honest assessment of your needs for that area, any special conditions that are going on, and then sort of what that area is. So in terms of needs, I needed a low maintenance area. I frankly cannot take on any more high maintenance gardens. In fact, I have actually thought about making my gardens smaller, but I don't even really know how to go about doing that, and I think I would regret it. So anything I create from here on out, I think really has to focus on being low maintenance. Now, low maintenance to me is probably still kind of high maintenance to some people, but I'm talking about things that don't need constant deadheading to look good, that I don't need to be out there 1 or 2 days a week managing. I can be out there maybe, once it's established, a couple of times in spring and a couple of times in fall and a couple of times in between, but for the most part, it sort of manages itself. The other thing I need is for it to be deer resistant. We have a lot of deer around here, and I manage them in many of our other gardens because the gardens are close to the house, so the deer don't come as close to the house. The dogs are around, so the dogs help, I think, with that. And then I also use a lot of deer repellent, and I'm happy to go around and spray that on my gardens, but I'm not really looking to have a reason to spend more time spraying plants with deer repellent. So it's important to me that what I plant out there is deer resistant, and that's a bit of a bummer because I keep coming across plants I'd like to put there that are not deer resistant, and I just have to immediately cross them off the list and be brutal about it because I just don't need more things to spend money on for the deer to eat. The other factors that you probably need to consider are soil. Have a general concept of what your soil is like in that area and what you're dealing with. I have done a video on getting a soil test, so I'll link to that as well. It's probably a good idea if you haven't done a soil test to do that. Have a general idea of what the makeup of your soil is. My soil out there is beautiful. It's sandy loam with a ton of humus in it because it's basically been a natural area. Unfortunately, I also have quite a slope there that I don't want to have. So I am actually going to be filling in with a lot of topsoil. So my soil will not be the native soil that is there. It will be the soil that I bring in. And over time, it will become the native soil because leaves will drop on it and compost will go in it, and it'll become something else, but that's a ways down the road. So it's a little hard for me to factor in the soil because I don't know exactly what I'll be getting. The one that I think is really important that you should be really honest with yourself about is exposure and light. Exposure meaning, is it open to the wind? Is it a spot that's going to be covered in salt from a snowplow or anything like that? For me, exposure in this spot is not a particular factor. It's quite well protected, so that's not an issue. But light is something that we all have to factor in. And I would say learn from my mistake and don't be overly optimistic. I often think there's going to be more sun than there is in an area. It's been a mistake, and I'm trying to get better at it. So make sure if you're planting a garden that you're looking at that space. This is why it's nice to plant a garden over the long term, because I've been watching that space for over a year now, and I know what it looks like when the trees are fully leafed out, which of course is entirely different from what it looks like right now. So have a sort of honest moment with yourself to figure out those things. And even though some of those things are going to be limiting factors in what you can do, try to look at them as, frankly, a gift, because there are so many options out there that if there are factors that narrow down what you can plant there, well, consider that just a gift because your list of things just got smaller. The next thing you want to do is kind of get a concept of what style of garden is going to be there. Now, you might have already done this because the second you looked at that spot, you might have envisioned a specific kind of garden there. But if you haven't, it's time to narrow that down and nail down a general style, because that dictates everything else from here on out. From everything from if you're going to have specific garden beds, how those are going to be designed. If you're going to have edging, what that might look like. If you're going to have a path, is that going to be a concrete path or a pea gravel path or just grass or mulch? It dictates everything else that happens there, including the plant selection. So narrow down what style of garden you think you might like. And I would say if it's not totally obvious to you, and I could do a whole video on how to choose a garden style, And I'm not going to do that. But I would say if it's not totally obvious to you, hit up Houzz and Pinterest and just start flipping through pictures and pinning things and saving pictures that catch your eye, but don't try to make sense of why they catch your eye, and then go back later on and say, what are the factors here that are the similar amongst these pictures? And that'll give you a good idea for what you like. Of course, things like house style and neighborhood and all those things sort of play into this, but that's a good place to start. For me, the style of this garden is actually going to be sort of a new perennial movement, naturalistic type of garden. And I'm a little surprised, believe it or not, that I'm actually going to be making a garden like that, because I never thought I would have enough space to do that, nor did I think it really worked with what I had. But as I plant new gardens and change things up, I see myself moving more in that direction. And I also know that I am a person who has a very visceral reaction to being in a garden. If I visit a garden, I know almost immediately if I like it or which parts of it I like. So I go to the Lurie Garden in Chicago about twice a year, and I can't tell you what it is that I like about that garden. It's very hard for me to put that into words, but I get a very specific feeling, and I don't even know what that feeling is. I just know it's good. So between that and other gardens I visited that have areas of the garden like that, it's something that's very attractive to me. It feels good. And so I'm going to go with it, even though, I mean, that might not necessarily go with the sort of formal vegetable garden I have, or the, fancy dahlias that I have growing along the house. This is a pretty big stretch from that. And to me, that's okay. I don't mind changing it up in my own garden. And I do feel like I've got transition zones that help that make sense. But it's what I like, so it's what I'm going to do in my garden. And I would suggest that you do what you like in your garden too. So the next step, and this might be already happening, is to start making a list of the plants you want there or features you want to have there. And just let this be a brainstorming list. Don't limit yourself. If it pops into your head and you think you like it, put it on a piece of paper or in a note in your phone and just keep that list. My list is mostly plants, but this is just sort of a brainstorming exercise so you know where to start. Okay, now with all those things figured out, now it's time to get something on paper, and you really have to do that. And I know this is the part that concerns a lot of people. It was very intimidating to me, because you see in books and magazines and on TV, you see garden designers who make these beautiful, very artistic sketches. And what you need to remember is that those are designs that are created by garden designers to show to their clients. They have to pitch a project to their client in a way that their client can understand their vision. And the nice thing is that if you're designing for yourself, the only person who needs to understand what's on a sketch is you. So I would say get over wanting to make it too artistic unless you are of that ilk. Personally, I took a whole class on how to create proper garden design drawings, and that was a waste of money because I can't do it. So, and I spent so much time worrying about the piece of art that it was a separate thing from actually just designing a garden. So I do it in two ways. One is the old piece of graph paper and a tape measure, or I do that, I have an app on my iPad that I also use sometimes, and I measure out the space and I draw it out and I start on a piece of graph paper, because getting an idea of size is very important when it comes to figuring out how many plants you're going to need. The other thing I use is an overhead image, which I find to be particularly helpful to build off of, because you know exactly where certain features are in the landscape without having to guess or sort of half measure where they are. So I now have a drone, which is really handy for getting an image. But other things you could do is, if you have a second story window that you can look down on that area on, you can take a picture that way, or check Google Earth, because you can actually get a really good indication of what an area looks like from Google Earth, and then you can print that out and you kind of work right off that picture. Now, when it comes to physically drawing on there, I think you just have to develop your own style. So for instance, Pete Udoff is perhaps the most well-known garden designer in the world right now, and certainly one of the most important of our time. And this is his latest book, which I believe is actually sort of an expanded and updated version of a book he wrote some time ago. But Pete's designs are nothing more than essentially colored pencils and magic marker drawn onto a plot. He has a key for each plant, and then he just draws them on. And I think he's using some colors here that indicate what that plant might be. But this is all he does. And then he'll turn over a large version of this to the people who are actually building the gardens. This is not far off from what I do, although often I color in the areas rather than have a little key and then I just draw a line to them with the name of a plant so I know what it is. But, this is something pretty simple that I think anybody could do on some scale. And I think, what you're looking at here is more shapes of plants so that you want a mass of plants. And if you've got a mass of plants that takes a little bit of a curve one way instead of the other, it's not that big of a deal, because those are decisions that are much easier made when you're standing in the space with a bunch of plants in pots that you can lay out, because you're going to set everything out in pots before you plant a single thing so that you can get a feel for it. So that's one option for how to do something. Like I said, it doesn't really matter how you draw that out, but draw it out so you've got something to refer to. It helps me a lot to stand in the space. So I like to walk out there and stand there and look around. And in the process of standing there and looking around and then thinking about my plant list that I've already made and all my other needs, that's when things start sort of changing for me. What I realized when I was standing in that space and thinking about those plants was that I really need a path. But to me, as much as I love a garden path that goes nowhere important comes across very quickly as pointless. So I needed to create a spot in that garden that became a place to go. And so here's a little quick video I did when I was out there. So forgive the cell phone video, guys. There's actually a big old blizzard coming. And I just wanted to get out here to make a couple of mental notes about where things might go before, because I have a feeling this is going to get filled up with snow, and we're going to have snow here for a long time once that happens. So just last night I came up with the idea that because I'm expecting the plants here to be very tall, it might be really neat to have, I like being amongst them, and I was thinking I would like to have a path through here, because I like these gardens so that I can be among the plants. But what's the point of a path that just walks through an area off your driveway unless there's a place to go? And so I was sort of thinking, we have bridges down there. You can see one that crossed this little stream. And I was thinking, what if we did a wide bridge that you could actually plop a chair on and sit on? And if I put that bridge right across here, this giant tree stump, which obviously we're not moving, starts to make more sense to me, because as we fill this in, if you've got, oh my gosh, sorry about the weather, guys. If you've got a little seating area right here, that makes more sense. And then I also tromped through here and I realized that one of the feature trees that I would like in here should be over here, which is roughly lined up with very similar trees that I'm going to put over there. So this idea of a little platform that might go over that stream gives me a place to go, and then there'll be a path on either side of that stream that I think will be rather circuitous, so that you can walk around a little bit more and just be inside of that garden rather than outside that garden looking in. So once you have your plan on paper, that's still just a step in the process, because once you get out there with the plants, things will undoubtedly change, and just give yourself the freedom to do those things. But that's where I'm at right now with this project, and I thought it might be helpful to just kind of walk you guys through how I design these spaces. I will tell you, I'm getting better at it with practice. The patio garden design that I did last year worked out better than I ever could have hoped it to, and certainly better than any other design I've ever done. So I do feel like I've finally developed a process that is sort of working for me. So this might be part one of a design video. If you guys are interested in seeing more of this, like how I'm actually putting the plants in there and stuff, let me know. And if I can come up with a creative way to do that video, we'll do that. But either way, I will make sure to take you along on the process once we get to that in spring and kind of see where this all goes. So I hope this was a little bit helpful to you just to see how I kind of come to these design ideas. And I hope you can kind of create your own spaces and develop your own style that works for you. If you found this video helpful and if you're still hanging around, do me a favor, give it a like and subscribe so you can catch the rest of my videos. But in the meantime, happy designing.